Welcome to the Magical Salon, where two regular people, Amanda and James, explore mystical ideas and big questions. From books to pop culture, if it's a doorway to something deeper, we're probably into it. We're not experts, and maybe you aren't either, but that's kind of the point.
Welcome to the Magical Salon. I am your co-host, James, and I will be an alchemist this week.
And I'm Amanda, your internet troll.
I like that. Yeah, this episode will be trolling for the truth. Really, what we're going to discuss is the age of machine that we find ourselves entering or already deeply embedded within as a culture, and specifically looking at kind of how machines and technology are shaping humans and the world around us, which obviously we're aware of how we use these machines, but I kind of think we overlook too often how big of an impact some of these technologies might be having on people themselves, like myself included, and including the listener, because being able to listen to this podcast would not have been possible 100 years ago. Just kind of an interesting thought. That sounds like a long time, but on the grand scheme of things, it's not that long. So I'd like to start with this. Do you, my co-host and patroness, do you feel that there's anything going on with this age of machine?
What do you mean, is anything going on? Like, what are you asking?
I guess the question is how in our lives, which is admittedly not that long, there's been a lot of change societally around technologies. And I'm just curious if there's any specifically massive moment that you can think of that has occurred in your lifetime where a technology has completely transformed how something is done within our lifetimes.
I mean, yeah, there's self-driving cars, supposedly, and self-driving Ubers. There's AI. I mean, I feel like most things are done completely differently.
And I think this is about the age of machine that we're entering. I think that the idea we're trying to talk about this time is the sense of magic. And do you think, and I think personally, and I'm curious what your thoughts are, I feel like while all of these technologies are good and they have benefits and good elements to them, there is a catch, and there's something that they ask of you or us as a society or civilization. Essentially, it's not all good. There's some give and take with the usage of these technologies. And to me, it kind of seems like magic and spirituality are two things under attack or being pushed away in favor of technology. To describe a profound experience or an inner sense of peace or whatever that you could get from meditating or doing these spiritual practices doesn't really jive with technology, which is all about explosions, numbers, clicks. So I think from my perspective, that's one of those things where technology is good, but in some ways it's also kind of shaping things we pay attention to away from things that people historically paid attention to.
I mean, the question really is the internet good at all? I don't know. There's an argument to be made that it's not and that it shouldn't have been created. But I think just more broadly, any major change in terms of technology always has some sort of pitfalls or challenges associated with it. I mean, even back in the day when they would come up with a new piece of farm equipment, it's like, okay, well, you're putting laborers out of work because now there's this new, or like think of the assembly line, and a lot of that is automated, or there's an automated aspect to it, and that takes away. So then it's like, okay, well, maybe there's an increase in safety and no longer does a person have to do this dangerous job in a factory. But now that's one less job that they can even be offered in the first place. But I also think that, I don't know that I think that the internet necessarily has anything to do with the decline in spirituality. I feel like it's just our modernized, highly technologized world in general, not just the internet. And I also feel in some ways it's easier to interact with and become aware of some of these spiritual things because of the internet, because you have a lot more at your fingertips.
One thing I think about relating to technology specifically, and the internet is a part of it, is in my mind, if you have technology, that basically means you're losing some degree of nature. To have something automated requires it to be systematized. Assembly lines or formulas in Excel and stuff. You're creating uniformity in nature that doesn't really exist. Every tree is different, but the entire world now is all about producing widgets that are identical. So mass producing vehicles where every one of them is the same color, like the Model T, for instance. It's about creating replicas which don't exist in nature. You can have similar things or the same kind of things, but they're not the same thing, which I think we are kind of moving towards. And I kind of think in some ways, technology is kind of the string. If you think of how people refer to it, the internet, the interwebs, we're describing it in our vernacular as this spiders have webs. You don't want to get caught in a web. But if you think of the internet or the power grid, we are caught in the grid and the net of electricity. You can't escape it at this point. It's just all encompassing. And I kind of think that's the mass enclosure of humanity, basically. We've already roped off and cordoned off the physical land. It's all fenced. Somebody owns it. The nations have borders. So you can't physically go anywhere you want anymore. Whereas 2,000 years ago, you could just pick up and wander to the next town and see what they're doing or whatever. You had more agency in that sense. Now that's kind of the con with technology is to get the benefits of it, you're giving up autonomy to some extent. Even if you think of a car, well, it did a lot to advance travel, and now I can get in my car and drive from one side of the country to the other because we have highways and infrastructure. In like 20 hours when those people do cannonball runs where they drive across the entire US as fast as possible. I just think of how back in the day, that would have been impossible because you would need to walk. Cars didn't exist. But at the same time, by having a car and infrastructure, you can now only travel where there are roads. Obviously, roads are pretty much everywhere. They're very prolific, at least in the US. But it's freedom with a catch. It's freedom in places that have roads. It's freedom on roads. So you can only drive and traverse in sanctioned or allowed areas now, basically. We've done that on the physical world. That's been happening. But I think recently, this age of machine, it's now coming for, and that's the scary part. It's coming to the internet, which is not a physical place. You cannot point to it and say this is being controlled or taken from us. It's just a mental assault almost, a psychological crowding in of the mind that we're experiencing.
Yeah, I mean, what I think is interesting is, well, just to kind of touch on a few things that you mentioned. In general, as humans, but specifically in a capitalistic society, we're creating to discard. We're creating so that people will feel the desire to buy something, but there always has to be another cool new thing on the horizon. So even as soon as you buy the new thing, there's another new thing that you want more, or that you will soon want more as soon as you can afford it. I mean, just think about like fast fashion and all of those types of things. And just more broadly, I don't know, the concept of ownership, it's more tricky in light of technology and stuff. On the one hand, someone owns pretty much everything, like every piece of land, somebody owns it. But then at the same time, it's kind of still an illusion, because even if you own a piece of land, not only is the concept of that ridiculous, but let's just say that you own a piece of land, that doesn't mean you can do what you want with that piece of land. I mean, think of zoning laws and regulations. You can't water your yard as much as you want. You can't light a fire in certain areas due to fire restrictions. What exactly are you able to do with this land? I don't know. The whole concept of that is weird to me. And now everyone pretty much owns everything online too. So it's like you want to get this digital real estate, but at the same time, it's become more and more difficult to do anything online, because it's almost like you've gone from having an open wandering role play game to now you have to pay to enter every single space.
Yeah. So basically, we've taken the mass enclosure that happened on the physical, the real world, and now that mass enclosure is applied to the digital space. We're seeing where companies, you see the consolidation where they're like, oh, who owns the content? Netflix and Disney own like half the movie studios and stuff now. So the digital realm is becoming owned, and you see that graphic where it's like, what, 6 companies own pretty much every single piece of media, like all channels, all the TV stations, all these different things are owned by some megacorps, but that's kind of the inevitable result of technology, because as technology advances, you have to all be using the same thing. But as you get to a technology, it's requiring you to use all of the assumptions that come before it. But I think the other thing that's interesting regarding ownership, to your point, we're getting into this weird area now where you have to pay for rights to own digital tokens or access things. That's just kind of insane to think about, though, because you're paying for something that, like, I can look at this on my phone. I could watch that movie on my phone, but they're just not letting me. They're like, no, you have to pay to use this. I just think that's kind of a fascinating thought when you really think about it. But then also patents and copyright, the idea that you can own an idea, especially when you think of coding or medicines, there's nothing preventing others from making this. We've just arbitrarily made a rule that says one person owns this and nobody else can use this until like 25 years have passed.
Well, and in terms of medicine, you're creating artificial shortages. Earlier today, I was watching some video and thinking about like, oh, what if that person that you drove by on the side of the road could cure cancer or whatever, but instead they're working a dead-end job and they don't have time to mentally do the work that would lead to, you know, making this life-altering and world-changing shift, I guess. But then the bigger question is, if cancer even could be cured, would any company allow you to do so? Because people being sick is such a big moneymaker. I guess what I'm saying is the goals of capitalism and the goals of humans are fundamentally at odds. And if you think about it in the terms of like creating a social media app, it should be a free thing anyone can access where you go to be in community. It's a digital third space, but now they all have paywalls or weirdly censored, or at the very least, they're all affiliated with these giant corporations who are trying to figure out how to mine you for data or how to make money off of you. I don't know. It's just, yeah, I mean, it all comes back to capitalism ruining everything for us.
I don't think capitalism's the issue, which you love to talk about. I think it's really just, I think it's technology is to, it kind of reminds me of the book, The Technological Society, that Jacques Ellul wrote, some French guy in like the 1950s. And he called it technique, was his term, essentially describing any form of invention. So language would count in his terminology as like a part of technique, which is this larger, it's a human created thing that kind of exists outside of humanity, which sounds trippy, but if you think about it, the baby brain, this is from a book that I wrote this quote down, but it does a good job of tying in language to humanity. So, quote, "The baby brain does not invent language, nor can it choose to learn English or Chinese. It is entirely dependent on information which must come from the outside. There's no such thing as a human nature independent of culture." I think it's interesting because the idea on its face doesn't make sense. It's like, what are they talking about? Like, yeah, you can learn Chinese or English. But he's saying, as a literal newborn, you will learn the language of the culture you grow in. The outside factors have just as much kind of nature versus nurture. The environment you're existing within does a lot more to form and shape your worldview than I think we realize. And I think the big difference recently, the environment and the proliferation of technology into all of our lives is shaping how we view and interact with the world on a grand scale. And it's all happening at once simultaneously, where everybody around the world is now addicted to their phones. They're getting all of this stuff blasted at them. They're getting beeps, notifications. That never happened. 20 years ago, maybe you would have a pager if you were an ER doctor to get called in. Now you can get pinged, anyone, Joe Schmo. I'm a burger flipper and I'm getting messaged by my boss. Can I come in and pick up this shift? Things that are just unnecessary. So the promise of everything everywhere all at once, which is pretty much the MO of the internet. It doesn't matter if it's drugs, sex, violence, sports, betting, anything you can think of, you can get on the internet. But that also means anything on the internet can get you at some point basically. Like, you could be living your life and have your identity stolen or your info hacked while you did nothing. And I don't think that ever really existed throughout humanity to the scale it does today.
But are you not just a Luddite pining after long begotten times then? At what point, I don't know, I feel like we need to come up with a solution. Not us personally, but I just think in general, people have this tendency to just gripe about stuff and not present any alternatives. Or even if there's no alternative solution, an alternative vision perhaps might be more apt.
I agree. And I'm not saying I have an answer, right? Obviously, I don't. I kind of think in order to even address this solution, in order to begin developing a solution, you have to first acknowledge and agree upon a problem in the first place. So we're kind of trying to elucidate that.
Nobody's ever going to agree on anything ever again, in part because of the internet. Because you can now way more easily align yourself with these pockets of people who will echo chamber your own thoughts back to you. And so no longer are you like, well, here's my thought, but I haven't really encountered anyone in real life that shares my thought with me. So even just by that, you're on more shaky footing. But now if you have an online group that also agrees with you, you're bolstered by that. So it's way harder for anyone to ever even talk to each other, let alone agree on anything.
I understand what you're saying. There's echo chambers and nobody will agree on anything. I disagree though, because technology it's almost invisible how much of a grip it has on especially the West, like America, internet. People are always on their phones. And this did not exist 25 years ago. I remember a world before phones, which is kind of an insane thought. It almost is reminiscent of like people that existed before a plane. Ancient civilizations, if they saw a plane, they'd be like, aliens are here, or God is coming, or the sky is falling. If you saw a plane flying through the sky, and now it's like, that's an everyday occurrence for most people. But the thing that I think unites us is that we are humans. We're kind of mentioning the great enclosure, basically, where the land was all cordoned off. Now the internet, the digital spaces are all cordoned off. They're owned, paywalled. The way to strike through to the root of the problem is to re-inspire humans to kind of go back to nature or try to recognize the grip that the technology has so that we can be more conscious. So kind of, if you don't even know that you have a problem, you're not even aware of it. You're not even perceiving its influence on you. So the first step is to have to like open the eyes, look at it. It's everywhere. Have you not had that moment? Sometimes when I'm in a grocery store or if we're at a restaurant, I'll just have this moment where I'm looking at stuff like everything's fake. That chicken is bagged, it's been sanitized, and it's just sitting there and it's got a label and it's like, we love our pigs or whatever. Why is this company claiming that they love humanity and stuff? They don't care about this at all. It's just like very weird. And then you'll see kids, it'll be a beautiful day, but they're just outside staring at their phone. They're not looking at the nature. I don't know. It's weird.
Okay, that makes you sound like such a boomer, because my parents used to say that to me. When they would basically, my dad would, he would like kick us out of the house to go play outside and get some sunshine. And me and my brother did not like playing outside. I mean, sometimes we did, but most of the time we wanted to be indoors, although we weren't necessarily on technological interfaces. But we would just go outside and then like stand by the back door and peer our heads in the window, hoping that we looked pitiful and that he'd let us back in. But he didn't. I guess what I'm saying though is there's only so much you could do on the computer then.
Exactly. You used to have less options. So again, the promise of the internet, everything, everywhere at all. Like, why bother going outside when you could watch this rich guy do a backflip off a mountain? Or you could watch somebody do an insane bet or lose their money or do all this crazy stuff. Why do anything out there if you can get everything here with no effort? That's kind of the promise of the internet. But I think it's really kind of turning us into a Wall-E society. So all we do is consume, we throw stuff out, we don't look at it, we just dump it in a different part of the world. We're happy to just be consumers. We live in a consumer society. But isn't it, the quote is something, infinite growth in the real world is called cancer. Infinite growth in the economy is the goal. So our entire society is predicated on a false premise. Infinite growth is not possible. Yet we expect our companies to make more money every single year. There's kind of a give and a take. You have an ethos behind society, the myth of civilization, the new myth of civilization, you could say. It used to be God. We've killed God. Nobody believes in God or an afterlife. So now the myth is money, power. That's not good, though, as a society's root. Going back to your previous comment regarding as a kid, when you'd get kicked out of the house. And this is the thing.
That happened to you?
Of course it did. That happened to me too. But that's kind of coming from two people that are in some ways privileged because we didn't grow up in a city.
Not this again with not being able to touch grass in New York City.
I think there's something to that. Kids nowadays, to your point, we were talking about remembering a world before phones, remembering a world when you didn't have all this, you didn't have video games, computer games. So it was like, of course, I'm just going to go outside and kick the ball with Billy or whatever down the street. Part of the great enclosure, you could argue, is there is no more public land. Any open land that's not developed will be developed, or it's a dumping waste yard. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's fenced off. You can't just run in the woods anymore. Everything is developed or in the process of being developed. So there is no third space in the real world. The only place you can go that's not your house or school or work is the internet, basically. So it's forcing you, it's removing you from the real world and forcing you into the digital world, which is what the corporations want, right? They own the physical land. They don't want you on their land, though. So they're like, okay, go in your box and instead play on this app that I own, and I will feed you what you should buy, what you should want. All of the stuff we consume, we get culture now from our phones, from our TVs.
You're basically reciting back the components of my short story to me. There's a line in there where I'm talking about we've solved the problem of shortage by creating a surplus in digital form. Things are actually truly lacking in the physical world, and so people have to go online to get certain needs met. And I think it's partially being designed like that, to your point. But then at a certain point, no need will be met. It just seems like a great chunk of our needs and more of our needs as a society are not getting met. And it's just, I don't know. I mean, to your point about, oh, we need to go back to nature. Genuinely, I don't see how that would be possible logistically, but also I just don't see people being able to give up the things that they have. I think they would resist that to a great extent. In some ways, I think we've reached the event horizon point. There is no other option other than sail off a cliff, which sounds bad, but...
So this book that I've been reading, and I'm obviously into this topic of technology and humanity and the intersection of the two. So this book I've been reading, Against the Machine by, I don't know, Paul Kingsnorth or something. He talks about cities as being a relatively recent development in the story of humanity. So he's English, but he's talking about like in 1870, I think that was the first time more people lived in a city in England than in the country. 1870. Then it was like 2007, so 150 years roughly, is when 50% of the globe lived in a city, which is just a fundamental change in how people live. But then this is the damning part when he talks about a city, and he says, quote, "A city removes our agency. It de-skills us and toys with us as its leisure. A city's inhabitants are dependents. They have neither the space, the skills, the time, nor the inclination to fend for themselves." But I think that's really talking about what we're describing. You have nothing anymore. I'm complaining about it. You say to me, well, you're just complaining, you're critiquing. Well, then what are you going to do about it? Even if you want to, quote unquote, go back to the good old days and live on land, you can't do that anymore. Like, there is no land. You're screwed. Do you know what I mean? It's all commercial owned farms. Nobody in your world knows how to do anything. It's all done by machines somewhere else, and it arrives on your doorstep, but you don't know how to plant crops. You don't know how to tend to cows. You don't know how to defeather. You don't know how to do any actual skills, which again, the education system's not raising good humans. It's raising productive members of societies, but productive is the operative word. It wants workers. It's not raising good people or a civic servant if you think of the ancient ideals of Rome or Greece, when they'd be like, oh, the unexamined life is not worth living. Like, you know, the idea of just everybody's involved in the community and you all do this stuff to help each other. The utopia is dead, basically. A utopia in the real world has been killed. The idea of that, like Nirvana, the Garden of Eden, heaven on earth, whatever, nobody talks about that anymore. That's never in movies. All of our media is a dystopian hellscape where it's either been bombed to shit or we polluted it so bad that we fled the country and the planet, like Wall-E.
Well, to be fair, in order to create a dystopian society, dystopia draws on the idea of utopia. So by having dystopia, you are invoking utopia. It's interesting when you were talking about that quote where he was talking about how living in a city de-skills you, basically, and it puts you at the mercy of others. I mean, it reminds me of that quote. Is it Marx who was talking about you need to own the means of production? Otherwise, you are only always ever at someone else's mercy because you can control nothing. I mean, that's a powerful thing.
This book's really good because, yeah, I mean, he even talks about a person living in a city, just any city. They don't know where their food comes from. So in 1870, most people still knew where their food came from, especially globally. Everybody was at least somewhat directly connected to the land, very literally. Now, I don't know where my food comes from. Eating chicken nuggets at the grocery store, they're probably not even from this state. They're probably getting shipped from around the world. So nothing we eat is local and it's all fake, which is a different thing. But it's really just talking about the separation of humans from the environment.
So when you were talking about the promise of the internet, I forget what you said. Everything, everywhere, all at once, I think is what you touted as being the promise of the internet. But in actuality, I mean, the government invented the internet so that they could communicate with themselves. They could pass information back and forth. That was like the reason it was invented. I just think it's interesting to think about it. And then, you know, the early versions of the internet were very much so closed loops. But now it is a digital theater. I don't know, just the concept of if you post a video of yourself just walking on the street and it goes viral, let's say, and you looked at the comments, like pretty much anything that could ever be said about you will be said in the comments or responded to in some way. But that's just not something that anyone should be exposed to psychically.
To your question earlier of how do you combat this or what's the solution? I think the solution is you need to start bringing magic back into the world, as in imagining things you can qualify and feel, not quantify and measure, which that's all we care about now is measuring and quantifying. But the idea being you can start talking about the internet in a different way. We don't have to talk about it as this beneficent or at the very least ambivalent entity. And I was thinking about this yesterday in prep for this. Do you remember watching the movie Pulse that we watched? They made 2 versions of it. Basically, this movie Pulse, I think it's originally Korean, and it's a dystopian movie. It came out in 2000. The premise of this movie is that there's a digital future with, it's unclear, but it's either demons or entities that are terrorizing humanity, and they live in the internet or the electric grid. That was the premise of the movie. So at some point they realize like, oh shoot, it's the phone. Get rid of your phone. A demon's gonna come out of it. That's their portal into this dimension. In the myth of this movie, maybe a physical demon's not gonna come out of that phone, but it might as well be a demon controlling you in the sense of it capturing your mind. Like you can apply that metaphor to it still. Underneath the technology, there is a purpose. It was built to do something. Control or grab your attention, which again, if you control their attention, you control the person. People are products of their environment to some extent. If all they're in is an online environment and you keep seeing like, join the metaverse, make a meta emoji person, make your digital avatar. It's this push to live constantly with your attention in artificial man-made environments instead of the real world. And that's the curse of technology. And I think as a byproduct of that, it also in a weird way, it destroys not just culture, but just uniqueness. To go viral, you have to use the same song that everybody else is using. You have to do the same dance that everyone else is using. You have to use the same filter. And companies already use the same branding and stuff too.
Not necessarily in terms of going viral. To a certain extent, yes. But sometimes you'll see a video go viral just because it's something so unique or so different or nobody's done it before. Is technology really the problem here, or are we? And by we, of course, I mean humans. Because could you not conceive, like, we're creating our own dystopian reality because we are greedy, rapacious humans. But could you not say that there could be a version of reality in which we use all this technology for ourselves to really support us as a society? We could create machines that would support us so that we wouldn't have to work, and we could create and we could make art and we could do all this cool stuff and just be together as people. That's an actual thing. That's an actual goal we could be literally trying to work toward, but nobody's even doing that. Just these companies have just jerry-rigged our entire shit and we're just at their mercy. But I mean, I guess what I'm saying is, as a people, we should really be thinking about what is our goal, and nobody's happy with the way things are.
It's a area we've entered kind of where it almost feels inevitable at this point. This would be sci-fi and insane to speculate 60 years ago. But the idea of a global transhumanist movement, there are literally people that have chips implanted into their brains that can now move arms, and like we can make limbs that can control fingers somehow, like by connecting to your brain. Is it that far of a leap then to say somebody's going to upload their consciousness to the computer, the cloud or whatever? Not really. Like, we already have the cloud. It already does all this stuff. We have AI being developed, which is allegedly artificial intelligence. It's more so the idea of, if that is an actual future, do we want it? We're kind of just creating it.
I feel like we are in a post-truth world in some ways. In the sense of, with artificial intelligence, for example, you can take a photo of someone. You can take any photo of someone, make it into a video of them saying something that they never said, make up a nude of them, or whatever the case is. How, at some point, won't we get to the point where we'll never know whether anything is true or real ever again? And what does that mean for us as a society?
The spiritual, religious answer to that would be truth is something that can be discovered internally. That's truth. It's the idea being you can personally find it. In any religion, you can find a unique path to God in some ways. Like, the divine is within you. You just need to find the path. Just thinking about something you mentioned right before that, the internet is everything everywhere all at once. And our societal cultural ethos has become, according to Crowley, our favorite on this show, is do what thou wilt. He's like, oh, do what you will. That's the whole law. There's no law. There's no God. Like, you're a God and do whatever you want. That's our motto now. If you have money, well, then do it, dude. Like, why not? Invent it. Oh, it doesn't exist? Do it. Do it. Just do it. Nike. That's a slogan. Just do it. Buy that car you can't afford. Do it. Rack it up on that credit card.
YOLO.
Yeah, you only live once. There's no such thing as reincarnation, sin, things that will follow you. No, just do it. That's the modern era that we live in.
Well, and doesn't that get to this idea that you don't owe anyone anything? But you kind of do in some ways. Like, why? That just kind of gets, again, to our just extreme sense of social isolation and selfishness masquerading as independence.
It's a shift in like how you view your relation to the world as a human, which, again, in this book, the guy talks about, he kind of defines, I don't even think it's him that does it, but there's 4 eras of humans, basically, the way society is structured according to him. So he says you have a political era, which is like ancient Greece. So you have the assembly and beginning of Rome. Then you have the religious era, which is like, I guess, I don't know, 0 BC to like the 1500s probably, where it's like you're just monk peasants under a king. That's basically how you lived. But you believed in religion and God, so you were faithful to a higher power in your life. Then we entered the economic era. That was like whenever money and globalization and stuff. So let's say like 1500s to like probably the present almost. Then you had the psychological. So the economic man is capitalism, industrialization. But now we're in the age of the psychological man, where the higher power is your wants. It's not making money, which you could argue is good or selfish, but the idea being If you're making money, you're being rewarded by the market, which represents other people. So you're helping others to make the money. That was the idea. Religious, period, man's devoted to God. And then the political era, I don't know, that was a long time ago, so who really cares? It's an interesting idea. We're now in the era where personal want that's the value. Society values people, like they abandoned their family and they are now rich and famous. But it's like, yeah, screw them. They were holding them back or whatever. It's like, I don't know. There's something kind of not good about that. Like, we shouldn't be celebrating that.
Well, it's kind of like, oh my God, I can tie this back to Marty Supreme. So basically in the movie, it's basically about a guy who is so afraid just to be a normal person. He seeks greatness at all costs, at extreme costs. Like, he's willing to pay any price to be great. But I think in a lot of ways, that is what is coveted by society. And a lot of the greats kind of demonstrate that. A lot of greats have tromped on people in order to get there. And when they get there, in some ways, it is applauded and they're not really criticized that much for their bad behavior, or they're able to do a lot of bad things once they are famous and they're not reprimanded and there's no consequences because they're so great. And it's like, what are we valuing here?
We're about to wrap up, but before we do so and let you blast into the psychosphere, we have some weekly wisdom for you, and it's a good one today. It is from a Russian Orthodox theologian, Nikolai Berdyaev. He said, "The will to power, to well-being, to wealth triumphs over the will to holiness and to genius. Spirituality is on the wane in a time of bourgeois ascendancy." Not sure when he wrote this. Definitely sounds old in Russian, but I will say that's how you have to kind of fight back. You have to re-find the spiritual element to your own life, I would argue, however that looks.
Peace out from your tiny little corner in the psychosphere.